A storm of screams filled the cabin when the captain's voice cracked through the speakers. "Is there any military pilot on board?" And for one long second, nobody moved. Then a small figure stood up in the aisle, a kid in a bright hoodie, barely tall enough to see over the seats, and she said something that made every grown adult freeze. "I'm 11, she said, "and I'm the only combat pilot on this plane." People laughed for half a heartbeat, not because it was funny, but because fear makes your brain grab at anything that feels impossible. Then the plane jolted, hard, like the sky itself had punched it. Overhead bins rattled, cups slid, a baby started wailing, and the flight attendant near the front turned pale as paper, staring past the rows toward the cockpit door like she could see death coming through the metal. The girl didn't flinch, she didn't cry, she didn't ask where her parents were. She looked straight at the terrified attendant and spoke like someone who had done this before, like someone who knew the exact number of seconds left. "In 3 minutes, everyone here dies unless you let me fly," she said. And right then, people stopped shouting and started begging. Not to God, not to the captain, but to a child they didn't even know, a child whose hands were still small enough to hold crayons, yet steady enough to hold a plane full of lives. So before we dive into how an 11-year-old ended up being the last chance for 200-plus passengers over open ocean, comment below where you're watching from. And if you want more real cinematic stories like this, hit subscribe. Before everything went wrong, the flight felt ordinary in the quiet way long night flights always do. The cabin lights dimmed, engines humming like a steady breath, passengers wrapped in blankets and half dreams as the plane crossed endless black water far below. Row 9 was easy to miss, just another stretch of economy seats. But in seat 9B sat a girl traveling alone, knees pulled up, hoodie drawn over her head, the fabric printed with a cheerful cartoon that looked wildly out of place on a flight like this. Her braids spilled over the armrest as she slept, small and curled toward the window. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a child sent ahead to visit family. An unaccompanied minor with a plastic badge around her neck and forms tucked into the seat pocket, the kind of passenger flight attendants checked on a little more often. One attendant had knelt beside her during boarding with that gentle smile adults save for kids who look nervous, asking if she needed juice, a blanket, reassurance. Another had returned later with crayons and a coloring book, trying to make the long flight feel shorter. The girl had thanked her softly and slipped everything away untouched. Not rude, just tired in a way sleep never seemed to fix anymore. The man in the aisle seat barely noticed her, his laptop glowing as spreadsheets filled the screen, deadlines and numbers more important than the quiet child beside him. To him, she was background noise, a kid passing time until adulthood began. Across the aisle, an elderly woman smiled at her with the warmth of someone who had raised children and missed them every day, pressing a wrapped candy into the girl's palm and whispering that long flights made anyone hungry. The girl smiled back, polite, grateful, and tucked the candy away for later. No one in that cabin saw anything unusual. No one suspected that the smallest passenger on the plane carried secrets heavier than the aircraft itself. To them, she was just another child in a hoodie, flying through the night, unaware that in a few minutes, the sky would demand far more from her than sleep. What no one on that plane could have imagined was that the girl in seat 9B was never meant to be ordinary. Not because she was special in the way movies exaggerate, but because her mind worked differently, faster, sharper, built for spaces most people never truly understand. Years earlier, a quiet research group working deep inside a government program had asked a dangerous question. What if some children could process motion, distance, and danger better than trained adults? What if fear had not yet taught them hesitation, and instinct still ruled their decisions? The idea alone was enough to start arguments behind locked doors. Some called it unethical, others called it necessary. The compromise was strict secrecy, parental consent, constant monitoring, and one unbreakable rule: these children would never be used unless the impossible happened. When the girl was 6, a team visited her school under the excuse of academic testing. Puzzles disguised as games, patterns hidden inside drawings, questions about how objects moved in three-dimensional space. She solved them without effort, smiling like it was all play. 2 weeks later, her parents were invited into a long meeting with people who never gave full names. They were told their daughter's mind could save lives one day, that she would still go to school, still have friends, still be a child. But she would also train for something most adults never could. They were warned it would change her forever. They asked if she could quit, if she would be safe, if she would still be happy. And when the answers came back honest and heavy, they signed papers that would not be unsealed for decades. Training began as games, simulators that felt like advanced arcades, lessons hidden inside fun. But by 7, she was sitting in real cockpits. By 8, she flew alone in aircraft modified for her size. By 9, she outperformed adult pilots during controlled combat drills, earning a call sign that instructors whispered with disbelief. By the time she turned 11, she had logged more real combat hours than many pilots twice her age, flown against drones, practiced impossible maneuvers, learned how to survive when machines tried to kill her, all while still doing homework, still watching cartoons, still pretending to be normal when she needed to be. So when she slept in that plane seat, hoodie pulled low and breath slow, she wasn't dreaming of playgrounds or toys. She was flying through fire, calculating angles, escaping locks, preparing for a moment she was never supposed to face, a moment that was now racing toward her at unimaginable speed. Up in the cockpit, nothing felt urgent at first. The flight had settled into its long, quiet stretch, the kind pilots almost run on muscle memory alone. Instruments glowing softly, autopilot steady, the endless Pacific stretched below them like a dark, unbroken mirror. The captain was a veteran of the skies, decades in uniform before switching to civilian routes. Calm hands, calm voice, the kind of pilot passengers never think about because everything feels safe. Beside him, the first officer monitored systems with practiced ease, both of them expecting nothing more dramatic than turbulence and routine check-ins. Then a warning tone cut through the silence, soft at first, easy to miss. Then another, sharper this time, the kind that makes pilots sit straighter without knowing why yet. Screens began to populate with symbols that did not belong there, moving fast, converging. The first officer leaned closer to the display, her voice tightening as she spoke. Multiple contacts, closing speed high, far beyond anything civilian traffic should reach. The captain frowned and reached for the radio, checking with air traffic control, but the reply came back confused. Their screen showed nothing, no planes, no threats, clear skies for miles in every direction. That was when instinct from a different life took over. The captain switched frequencies, his tone changing, sharper, older, the voice of someone who had worn a different uniform once. He reported the contacts and waited. The answer came fast and cold. Military command confirmed what the civilian world could not see. Unmanned attack drones, unknown origin, weapons armed, closing in. Estimated time to engagement measured in minutes, not miles. The cockpit fell silent except for the hum of engines. Two pilots staring at a future they were never trained to face. Fighters were being launched. Help was coming, but not fast enough. The drones would reach firing position first. The captain swallowed and asked the question no passenger should ever hear. What are our options? The response was brutal. Take evasive action. Buy time. Survive. He looked at the controls of a massive passenger jet filled with sleeping children and families and realized the truth all at once. He knew how to fly safely, smoothly, gently. He did not know how to fight. And in a few minutes, that difference could cost every life on board. The captain knew there was only one thing left to try. Even though the words felt impossible the moment they formed in his mind, his hand trembled as he reached for the cabin announcement, a sound that had always meant minor turbulence or arrival times, never this. When his voice came through the speakers, it didn't sound like authority anymore. It sounded like fear held together by discipline. He told everyone to listen carefully, every word measured, every second slipping away. He explained the danger as simply as he could, that the aircraft was under threat, that hostile machines were approaching fast, that he was not trained to fight them. Then he asked, begged really, for any military pilot with combat experience to come forward immediately, because time was something they no longer had. The cabin exploded into chaos, screams ripped through the rows. Parents pulled children tight against their chests. Prayers spilled in different languages. People stood, collapsed, cried. Some tried to call loved ones knowing deep down no signal would come through. Others froze completely, staring at nothing. A flight attendant dropped to her knees beside a fainting passenger. Another tried to calm a man hyperventilating into a paper bag, Training meant nothing now. There were no procedures for this. No calm script to follow when death was racing toward you at impossible speed. In seat 9B, the girl's eyes opened, not slowly, not confused, but instantly alert. Her body stayed still for a breath while her mind raced ahead, calculating, sorting, counting, threats and timelines lining up with frightening clarity. She had already counted the children on board earlier. She knew how many lives were about to be erased if nothing changed. She unbuckled with a quiet click that was almost lost in the screaming, stood up, and stepped into the aisle. While adults ran in every direction, she moved forward, calm and deliberate, walking against the flow of panic, a small figure heading toward the cockpit, as if this were exactly where she had always known she would need to go. The flight attendant nearly collided with her in the aisle, rushing toward the front with wide eyes and shaking hands. Already overwhelmed by 100 emergencies at once, she barely registered the small figure in her path until a steady tug stopped her mid-step. She looked down, expecting tears, panic, a child asking for help. Instead, she saw calm eyes looking back at her, focused and serious in a way that didn't belong to someone so young. "I need to speak with the captain right now," the girl said, her voice level, not loud, not pleading. The attendant's heart twisted. This was the worst moment imaginable. A child caught in something adults could barely understand. She started to guide her back automatically, telling her to return to her seat, to buckle up, to trust the crew. Then the girl spoke again, and the words didn't sound like a child at all. She recited a string of codes and identifiers, names that meant nothing to civilians but everything to the people trained to hear them. She said she was a military pilot, that she had combat hours, that there were minutes left, not time for debate. The attendant froze, disbelief battling instinct. This made no sense. Children didn't speak like this, didn't stand this straight, didn't look at death with calculation instead of terror. Yet something in the girl's posture, her stillness, her certainty, forced hesitation. Around them, passengers shouted and cried, some pointing, demanding to know why a child was being pulled forward, others begging anyone to save their families. The noise pressed in from all sides. The attendant thought of the captain's request, any military pilot, anyone at all, and of the clock that was still ticking whether she believed this or not. She swallowed, made a decision she would question for the rest of her life, and nodded, "Come with me." They moved toward the cockpit through a wall of fear, a uniformed adult escorting a small girl in a hoodie, while the plane raced toward a moment that would either rewrite everything or end it all. The cockpit door opened to a scene that felt unreal even to the people standing inside it. Warning lights glowed, screens crowded with moving threats. The captain turned sharply, already shaking his head before he even saw who had been brought forward. He stopped mid-protest when the girl spoke, her words cutting through the noise with clean precision. She stated her credentials, her experience, and the time they had left, not as a plea, but as a report. The captain hesitated only a moment before the radio answered for him, a military voice confirming her identity without question, ordering him to do the unthinkable, to give control to the child standing beside him. The shift was instant. The girl moved into position with practiced efficiency, adjusting the seat all the way forward, feet finding pedals modified only by necessity, not design, her hands settling on controls as if they belonged there. She spoke calmly, assigning tasks, instructing the first officer on throttle management, asking the captain to stay ready, warning them this would feel wrong, that the plane would move in ways commercial pilots never allowed. Outside, missiles launched, the alert sounded, and the cabin screamed as the aircraft suddenly rolled, not gently, but violently, a hard bank that pressed bodies sideways and ripped loose cries from every row. The horizon spun, sky becoming ocean, ocean becoming sky, gravity shifting in ways no passenger had ever felt. Yet the girl's voice stayed steady, calling out settings, speeds, angles. The massive aircraft bent its own rules, diving and rolling with purpose, not panic, shedding locks, confusing machines that had never been programmed to face something so unpredictable. For the first time since the attack began, the timeline changed. Seconds were stolen back from death, and in that narrow space, something impossible was happening. A child was fighting the sky itself, and winning. 3 missiles were gone, fooled into screaming past empty sky. But the remaining threats learned fast. Their guidance systems adjusted, recalculating, refusing to let go. Warning tones shrieked again as the danger closed in tighter than before. Instead of turning away, the girl did something that made both pilots stare in disbelief. She aimed the plane straight toward the oncoming machines, trading altitude for speed, forcing a head-on approach that shattered every instinct the captain had ever trusted. Her instructions came fast and precise. Engines pushed to their limit, airspeed climbing. The aircraft surging forward like it had something to prove. Passengers were thrown back into their seats as the roar deepened. At the final moment, she changed the shape of the plane itself. Uneven control surfaces deployed, one side dragging, the other slicing clean, the massive body twisting sideways through the air, not falling, not turning, but sliding. The missiles hesitated, confused by shifting signals, heat signatures disappearing behind metal, radar returns breaking apart just long enough. One streaked past, so close it shook the frame. Another detonated harmlessly behind them. Then the sky lit up with new shapes, fast and silent. Military jets tearing through the darkness, voices crackling over the radio with disbelief and respect. They engaged without hesitation. Clean strikes, bright flashes far away. Each explosion a threat erased. In the cockpit, the girl held the plane steady as the last danger vanished, breath finally quickening, hands trembling now that the work was done. The silence that followed felt louder than the chaos before it. And for the first time since the captain had made his announcement, the plane was no longer racing toward death. It was flying toward survival. The girl eased the aircraft back into steady flight, the violent motion fading until the engines returned to their familiar, even hum. Only then did she let out a slow breath, the kind that comes after holding fear and focus together for too long. She turned to the captain and quietly told him the threat was gone. That control was his again. That help was escorting them the rest of the way. Her voice sounded smaller now, tired, like the weight of what had just happened was finally settling in. The captain took the controls with shaking hands, staring at the instruments as if they might suddenly lie to him. Altitude lower than planned, speed higher than normal, fuel burned faster than it ever should have been. All signs of something no passenger jet was ever meant to do. When he made the announcement, his words carried awe instead of authority. He told the cabin they were safe, that military aircraft had neutralized the threat, and that they would continue their journey. A wave of sobs and disbelief rolled through the rows as people clutched each other, realizing they were still alive. In the cockpit, the girl asked for something simple, apple juice, maybe a moment to sit down. The first officer wiped tears from her face, overwhelmed by the contrast. A child who had just bent physics and fear asking for the same comfort any kid would want. The landing hours later was met by flashing lights and waiting vehicles. The runway lined with responders who had no idea how close the disaster had been, while uniformed officers quietly guided the girl away from the crowd before questions could start. As the plane slowed at the gate, passengers searched the aisles for answers, some remembering the small figure led toward the cockpit, others sensing that the person who saved them would never step forward for applause. The crisis was over, but nothing about that flight would ever feel ordinary again, because everyone on board knew they had survived something they were never meant to witness, and because of someone they were never meant to need. In the days that followed, the world tried to make sense of what had happened. Experts argued, headlines speculated, officials spoke in careful half-truths, but none of that mattered to the people who had been on that plane. They were alive, and they knew exactly why. The girl was reunited with her parents in a quiet room away from cameras. And for the first time since the night sky had turned hostile, she cried, not from fear, but from exhaustion, from finally being allowed to be small again in arms that had known her before the training, before the wait, before the responsibility. Questions came later about childhood, about sacrifice, about whether someone so young should ever have carried that burden, and she answered them simply. She said she did not lose her childhood. She chose a different one where cartoons and homework existed besides simulators and silence, one where fear was something you acknowledged and then moved through. The passengers went back to their lives, to birthdays and jobs and school mornings. Some held reunions, some wrote letters, some never spoke of it again. But every one of them carried the same truth, that on a night over open ocean, survival came from the most unexpected place. Years from now, people would still argue about ethics and rules and limits. But those debates would never change the outcome of that night. A plane landed instead of falling, families went home instead of being mourned, children grew up because another child had been ready. And somewhere, a girl who once sat quietly in seat 9B would fall asleep thinking not about headlines or praise, but about the simple fact that when everything impossible became necessary, she stood up, walked forward, and chose to save lives. Because sometimes the difference between tragedy and survival is not age, or size, or expectation. It is preparation meeting courage in the exact moment the world needs it most.